Once upon a time, there was a man I was engaged to, someone I thought I'd spend my life with. But fate had other plans, all thanks to my sister. In those dark days, I was devastated. Now, though, I've found new joy, and I'm eager to share it with my sister and my ex, Bob. My name is Catherine. I'm not stunningly beautiful, just an ordinary office worker. But once upon a time, there was a man named Bob who had promised to marry me. Bob was the handsome type, with a career at a prestigious firm, the kind of guy people call the catch. We were blissfully happy, in a way that made me believe it would never end. But then, life's cruelty intervened. I never did marry Bob, all because of my sister. My sister's name is Sophie, and she has always had a keen interest in fashion, which she maintains to this day. Unlike me, Sophie has always been meticulous about her appearance and has always been naturally beautiful. As a result, she attracted attention from boys since middle school and even had a stint as an amateur model for a fashion magazine. Sophie harbors dreams of becoming a professional model. Meanwhile, after graduating from college and settling into a routine job at a regular company, I found myself invited to dinner by a business associate named Bob. Over time, we got to know each other better through these dinners, and unexpectedly, something began to develop between us. That evening, Bob invited me out to dinner after work. I accepted without hesitation, enjoying his company. On our way back, Bob surprised me by confessing his feelings. Though taken aback, I realized I had feelings for him too, and so began our relationship. A year later, Bob proposed, and I happily accepted. Shortly after our engagement, Bob and I visited my parents to share the news. They were delighted, and discussions about wedding plans filled their home with joy. However, not everyone shared in our happiness. That person was my younger sister, Sophie. Sophie was shocked to hear about my engagement, and even more so when she met Bob. Always popular and admired for her looks, Sophie had a history of dismissing my more reserved romantic life. "I don't want my embarrassing sister to ruin my reputation," she would often say. Seeing me, whom she considered less socially adept, marry a successful man from a prestigious company before her seemed to bruise her pride deeply. Yet, I remained unaware of Sophie's true feelings, oblivious to her subtle disdain. Looking back, I should have noticed her demeanor then. One day, Sophie casually asked, "Since you're going to be my brother-in-law, can we exchange contact information?" Bob and I saw no reason to refuse, so we exchanged numbers without hesitation. As I neared the end of my job tenure, there were many late nights spent wrapping up projects. Then, on a day when my parents were away, Sophie put her plan into motion, a plan she likely devised long before knowing I would soon leave our family home to live with Bob. Sophie saw her opportunity. She called Bob, fabricating the story, "Bob, my sister suddenly came home sick. Our parents are out of town, and I'm feeling uneasy being alone. Could you come over?" Deceived by her ruse, Bob, who was just finishing work, rushed to her house without suspecting anything. "Miss, I rushed over because I heard Catherine was ill." "Where is she?" Bob's concern was palpable, and naturally, he assumed I was home. But Sophie quickly admitted, "I'm sorry, Bob. I lied to you. My sister isn't sick. She's still at work." Instead of anger, Bob responded with a puzzled expression. "Why would you lie about that?" Sophie, visibly nervous, began to explain. Meanwhile, after finishing my workday, I arrived home to an unexpected sight. Bob was there. Despite the surprise, I greeted him cheerfully. "Oh, you're here. What's up?" Little did I know this moment would soon bring the deepest despair and sadness I had ever known. "Catherine, I'm sorry. I think we should break up." Bob's words hit me like a sudden storm. Unable to grasp their meaning at first, I stammered, "What, are you serious? Break up? What's going on?" As I pressed for answers, Sophie entered the room, casting an uneasy atmosphere over us. "Catherine, the truth is I've been seeing Sophie. I'm sorry, but I've fallen in love with her more than I realized." Bob's words left me stunned and confused. Still reeling from the shock, Sophie added, "I'm sorry, Catherine, but Bob has decided to marry me." I felt utterly lost and devastated. Then, Sophie, with an awkward attempt at comfort, said, "You might not want to attend our wedding ceremony, but please come to the reception, won't you Teeters?" were all I could manage. Sophie had stolen my fiancé away from me. I felt abandoned, and the pain was overwhelming. My parents were deeply concerned, watching helplessly as I withdrew into my room. Having already quit my job, I felt utterly powerless. Messages from my former coworkers asking about the wedding plans only intensified my sorrow. I could only reply, explaining it would be a simple family affair. Months later, I found myself in a new and unfamiliar place, determined to begin anew and find true happiness after the painful breakup with Bob. I had withdrawn for a time, but a newfound determination welled up inside me. Why should I continue to suffer? It was time to move on. Things progressed swiftly from there. I spoke with my parents, deciding to leave home and start afresh in a completely different environment. The new place was surrounded by lush greenery. My parents supported my decision wholeheartedly, assisting me greatly with the relocation. Shortly after settling in, while taking a moment to relax, my mom approached me with surprising news. "You were in your room. Bob visited. He explained everything that happened between you two and apologized." I couldn't fathom why my parents were apologizing. What Bob had done was beyond forgiveness, yet there they were, even kneeling in remorse. "We've also heard about Sophie. We understand you can't forgive her, Catherine, but she's our daughter too," my parents explained, visibly torn. My parents were deeply troubled by Sophie's actions, knowing the pain she had caused me. Despite their disapproval, Sophie seemed to have made her choice and went to Bob. From then on, Bob began a daily ritual of coming to our house, pleading for forgiveness and seeking approval for his marriage to Sophie. Faced with Bob's persistence, my parents eventually felt compelled to relent. That's why they apologized to me for accepting his union with Sophie. "I honestly don't dwell on it anymore, but I understand how you feel," I replied with a bittersweet smile, holding back the tears. My mom was visibly emotional, while my dad wore a pained expression of apology. Despite everything, I reassured him, "When I have children, I'll lean on you both a lot." Their faces softened into smiles at my words. Mom, still teary-eyed, added, "Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything." As I settled into my new life and found some peace of mind, I began working at a cozy little restaurant. The team was small, but the atmosphere was bright and welcoming, which I appreciated greatly. The banter among the staff, especially the teasing directed at the manager, Steve, added to the warmth of the place. A few months into my job, a pivotal event unfolded that would shape my future. It happened one evening as Steve offered me a ride home after work and confessed his feelings for me. I was taken aback and uncertain. Steve was genuinely a good guy, kind-hearted, with both charm and a friendly demeanor that appealed to many. Yet, I couldn't shake off the past hurt that still lingered within me. I feared the possibility of facing abandonment once again. Steve seemed to sense my hesitation and assured me there was no rush for an answer before heading home for the day. Despite the initial awkwardness, the familiar camaraderie with the part-time staff and Steve's kindness helped ease my worries. Deep down, I felt my heart had already made a decision. During a break, I discovered something about Steve's past. It turned out he had been betrayed by someone he had been dating and had a rough experience at his previous workplace before joining the restaurant. We shared a similar pain of betrayal by those we trusted. That day, I chose to accompany Steve home to listen to his story. Along the way, he opened up about his past. He had previously managed a store, but due to certain events, the store lost credibility and eventually closed down. Steve bore the brunt of the blame and lost his job as a result. After hearing Steve's story, I felt compelled to share my own reasons for being at the restaurant. Hey, pause for a moment, would you care to support us? Like this video and subscribe for more. Now, let's dive back into the story. When I finished, Steve looked at me kindly and said, "You're incredibly strong." His words meant the world to me, acknowledging my resilience despite the pain I'd endured. It was exactly what I needed to hear. I did my best despite being betrayed by someone I loved. I managed to pick myself up. I confess, acknowledging the difficulty of my journey, to which I added sincerely, "You've done amazingly well too." Steve's smile grew wider, and in that moment, I found the courage to respond to his earlier confession. "Since that day, I might be a handful, but I hope you'll be patient with me," I told him. From then on, the teasing from the part-timers at the restaurant increased, but it was all in good spirit. "Congratulations! Wishing you both a lifetime of happiness." They cheered, genuinely happy for us. "That's a bit premature. There's a right time for that, and it'll come around again when it does. You better let me say it," Steve teased, a bit flustered, as I laughed along with everyone else. It was a moment of pure joy, a typical day in our lives until things took a turn for the second time in my life. I was proposed to. Without hesitation, I accepted, determined to find lasting happiness this time. I believe Steve was the one who could truly make me happy. I visited my parents' house for the first time in a while to share the news, and they were overjoyed, opening up about Steve. I felt their support as they said, "Please make our daughter happy. We trust you." "I will make Catherine happy," he asserted confidently. After chatting for a while, my dad hesitated before sharing, "Sophie and Bob are going to get married." He mentioned that an invitation might arrive, but insisted I needn't worry about it. Truthfully, I wasn't bothered. I was too wrapped up in my own happiness. In fact, I wanted to celebrate it openly. When I expressed this to my parents, they responded warmly, "If Catherine feels that way, then we trust your judgment." Sure enough, a few days later, an invitation to Sophie's wedding arrived. I decided we would attend together. Dave and I had opted for a simple legal marriage due to Sophie's impending wedding. We felt it would be less overwhelming for our parents and relatives to stagger our celebrations. We promised ourselves the proper wedding ceremony once things had settled down. On the day of Sophie's wedding, Steve and I arrived together at the venue. It had been a while since we had seen Sophie and Bob. Bob appeared weird, and there was a tension in the air as we exchanged greetings and introductions with family. When I proudly introduced Steve as my husband, Sophie's reaction was visibly surprised, etching the moment into memory. During the event, I found myself wanting to ask Bob about what had transpired between him and Sophie on the day when neither my parents nor I were present. Bob initially hesitated but eventually began to confide in me. According to him, when Sophie called him that day and informed him falsely that I was suddenly ill, Bob decided to wait for me. Sophie then arrived with strong drinks, coaxing him to indulge. Despite not being a heavy drinker, Bob had a few too many and became intoxicated. In his vulnerable state, Sophie took advantage of the situation, seducing him. Bob admitted that Sophie's beauty and allure played a role in clouding his judgment. Despite our engagement, he succumbed to temptation, and from then on, his attention began to drift towards Sophie. After hearing Bob's confession, his repeated apologies seemed insignificant to me. Honestly, I felt indifferent. What mattered most was finally knowing the truth. Meanwhile, Steve and Sophie were engaged in a conversation nearby. I was curious about their discussion but decided to inquire later, considering Sophie's upcoming wedding. On our way home, I couldn't resist asking Steve, "Were you upset when you were talking to Sophie?" Steve sighed. "As I mentioned before, she's my ex who betrayed me, but that's not all. She's also the reason I lost my job." I was taken aback. It felt like such a small world, and learning that Sophie was directly responsible for the closure of Steve's shop added another layer of shock. I dove deeper into the situation. It turned out that a few months into Sophie's relationship with Steve, she had an affair with a designer. Sophie believed dating someone in the modeling industry would be more advantageous, despite already being with Steve. When Steve discovered this by chance, he understandably confronted Sophie. However, instead of remorse, Sophie became angry, and the relationship ended abruptly. Sophie's anger didn't dissipate. She went further, fabricating a fake photo of foreign objects and dishes from Steve's restaurant and shared it on social media. Given her modeling career, she had a substantial following, and the photos quickly went viral. The negative publicity reached Steve's boss, who had entrusted the business to him. Amidst declining profits, the resulting closure of the restaurant led to Steve losing his job, with him unfairly bearing the blame. Steve harbored deep resentment over the incident, not knowing the true culprit behind the fabricated photo. He was left without a target for his anger. Amidst the turmoil, Steve finally discovered the truth during a casual drink with a friend. His girlfriend's friend had seen Sophie boasting on social media about causing the closure of a restaurant, unaware that the restaurant belonged to Steve. The friend relayed this information to Steve. Though Steve now knew who was responsible, it was too late to take any action, so he resolved to make a fresh start elsewhere. It was then that Steve and I crossed paths. I approached Steve with an apology. "I'm sorry for what my sister did. I'm the sister of the person who caused so much trouble in your life. I didn't know how to face you, I was afraid you might hate me." Steve's response was unexpectedly kind. "It's all in the past, Catherine. None of this was your fault." His words brought me immense relief, reaffirming our decision to pursue happiness together once more. Later, Sophie faced consequences for her actions. She had arranged a photo shoot at an unexpected location, our home, known for its lush greenery and picturesque backdrop. A deal for modeling shoes was evidently part of her ambition to pursue a modeling career. The incident took place during dinner at a restaurant she had visited, which happened to be Steve's. Since I no longer worked at Steve's restaurant, I heard about this incident afterward. Upon recognizing Sophie at the entrance, Steve promptly intervened, stating firmly, "I'm sorry, but I can't allow you to enter." He refused Sophie and her group access, prompting the staff to inquire about the situation. Steve proceeded to disclose Sophie's past actions and the hardships he had endured because of her. "She has a criminal record, and I have evidence to support it. I can't risk a repeat of past troubles, so I must refuse her entry." There was stunned silence among the staff, and Sophie visibly paled at Steve's words. Moreover, Steve declared his intention to inform the president of the company where Sophie was poised to start about her troubled history. The individual who had scouted Sophie was taken aback and urged Steve to reconsider, but Steve remained resolute in his decision. As a result, Sophie's scheduled photo shoot was cancelled, and news of the incident spread throughout the industry, shattering her aspirations of becoming a model. No one wanted to associate with someone who had caused such a significant scandal in the past. Adding to this, I learned from my mom that Bob's company had been experiencing declining performance lately, and he was now under consideration for demotion. She appeared concerned about what the future held for both of them. Despite the tumultuous events, Stephen and I continued to enjoy our days together happily. Today marks the eve of our long-awaited wedding. We've both overcome challenges in the past, but now we're filled with joy. There's also a new life growing within me. Congratulations! Wishing you a lifetime of happiness. The staff from the restaurant where we first met cheerfully repeat this familiar phrase. Let's conclude the story shortly. The wedding day arrived, and it was a beautiful celebration filled with laughter, love, and tears of joy. My parents were beaming with pride, and even my sister, Sophie, seemed to have a hint of regret in her eyes. As I walked down the aisle, hand in hand with Steve, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the journey that led me to this moment. It hadn't been easy, but I had come out stronger and more resilient than ever. The reception was a joyous affair, with friends and family gathered to celebrate our love. During a quiet moment, Steve and I stole away to a secluded corner of the garden. "I love you, Catherine," he whispered, his eyes sparkling with affection. "You're the strongest woman I know." "And I love you, Steve," I replied, my heart overflowing with happiness. You've shown me that true love can overcome any obstacle. As the night drew to a close, I knew that our story was just beginning. We had a lifetime of happiness ahead of us, filled with love, laughter, and the joy of building a family together. And though the past had been difficult, it had ultimately led me to the greatest love of my life. The end. After experiencing the full journey of our story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How did the story resonate with you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay blessed. Thank you for watching and see you in the next story.